The dragon has been a part of many folklores from around the world, and still exists today to captivate our imaginations in books, TV, and even video games. It is a large serpent-like creature, a legendary being that in most cases brings nothing but death and destruction upon all who are unfortunate enough to be within its sights. Dragons are often seen in varying degrees of colours, but there are a few commonalities in which they all share, including massive beating wings, long scaly tails, enormous claws, sharp teeth, and the ability to spew devastating blasts of fire. However, in Eastern cultures, they are more benign in nature and are often depicted as wingless. In fact, the earliest depictions of dragons from ancient Mesopotamian art show dragons in a more snake-like form. Dragons in these areas are to be revered, respected, and represent a certain power, like with the Emperor of China, who during the imperial years was the only one permitted to wear clothing that sported a dragon. Yet in Western cultures, specifically those in high Middle Ages at the time, dragons were monsters that would either need to be tamed or killed, usually by some saint or a contemporary hero, such as Saint George. But where do these fantastic creatures come from? Well, there's a lot of dispute as to the true origins of where the idea of dragons came from, but one interesting theory comes from David E. Jones, an anthropologist, who suggested that humans have inherited a sort of instinctive reaction to snakes, amongst other animals. It's understood that a third of adult humans suffer from or show signs of ophidiophobia, which is the fear of snakes, even though many have never had an encounter with a snake, or may live in an area where stumbling upon a snake is virtually impossible, unless of course your ex is in town. But snakes appear to closely resemble the earliest depictions of dragons, and so Jones concluded that the reason why dragons appear in nearly all cultures is because of our innate fear of snakes, and that our primary ancestors may have endured the same fear, given that animals like snakes were once a danger for them. It's this same fascination with the unknown, and the fear itself, that would serve as inspiration for tales and stories about dragons that were embedded in many folklore tales around the world, shared and spread by our ancestors in the days of ancient. Dragons are also said to reside in caves, mountain reaches, peaks, and forests, usually places that would have been teeming with danger for our early ancestors. While on the topic of the origin of dragons, another theory suggests that dragons may have been inspired by the finding of dinosaur fossils by our ancestors. Given the magnitude of some of the dinosaurs, most notably dinosaurs like the pterodactyl, the sheer size of this winged beast could have easily had our ancestors spinning their own tales about the prehistoric bones they came across. It's not hard to imagine that dragons were just a misidentification by our ancestors, and that they'd painted an image of what they thought the fossil would have looked like, only to arrive at the image of a dragon. In China, large fossil remains are frequently coined as dragon bones, and are even used in traditional medicines. For the most part though, it's quite easy to see that dragons in the later Middle Ages were simply blown out of proportion, where other living reptiles would soon help shape the image of the dragon we now know today. Some examples of dragons throughout history stem as far back as the mythologies in Sumerian and Mayan times. Ker, for example, in literary texts from Sumeria, is often considered to be one of the very first dragons documented in writing, and he is described as living in the void, somewhere above the Earth's layer, but also below the sea. He is often subjected to connotations of the underworld, or something of a wicked creature, lurking between the realms. His reputation as a malevolent creature is only further substantiated by his kidnapping of a goddess in Sumerian texts, which he takes with him to the underworld. Ker was successfully slain, though, by the hero Enki, and perhaps it's in stories like these that see several other mythologies and later works of fiction derive inspiration from. After all, a lone hero who slays a dragon is usually a common plot point in most of the stories concerning dragons. Ancient Mesoamerican folklore speaks of the dragon known as Kukulkan, who was worshipped as a serpent deity by the Mayans. legends exist about a boy who was born a snake. He was banished, but his sister still cared for him and raised him secretly in a cave. But as he grew, it became impossible to feed him, and so soon the serpent grew wings and burst out from the cave, taking to the skies in search of sustenance. As he did, he was said to cause an earthquake throughout the land. The legends retain that when there is an earthquake, it is Kukulkan, notifying his sister that he is still alive and is well. Interestingly, Kukulkan is closely linked with the feathered god in the pantheon of the Aztecs, known as Quetzalcoatl, yet another dragon who was worshipped. Dragons also appear in Norse mythology, most notably the creature Fafnir, who was once a mere dwarf. The dwarf was responsible for the murdering of his own father, so that he could inherit all of the jewels and treasures that had been stolen from the gods. However, after the dwarf collected up all of the treasures, he became consumed by greed. As a result of his greed, he was cursed and transformed into a dragon with armored scales. We also see dragons appear in Hinduism in the form of Vritra, a mythical dragon that once gave the god Indra a run for his money. In a battle, Indra was actually swallowed by the beast Vritra, and Indra had to resort to tickling the dragon's throat in order to escape. In Indra's absence, Vritra took hostage all of the earth's water and would receive a boon that he could not be killed by either solid or liquid. In order to defeat Vritra, Indra would outsmart the dragon by finding a loophole in the details of the boon, and was able to defeat the dragon using foam, that which was neither solid or liquid. Meanwhile, in Christianity, we see the fallen angel Lucifer transform into a dragon in an attempt to defeat the archangel Michael in a massive battle to determine the ruler of the heavens. In most stories revolving around dragons from mythology and folklore, the dragon usually takes form as an antagonist, which is usually slain, or comes across as a destructive being that maintains aggressive traits. Furthermore, there appears to be many mirroring plot points through each of these tales, as each respective culture is influenced by the other, regardless of the time period. You only have to look at the story of St. George and the dragon to see how similar it is to the story of the dragon Ker in Sumerian texts. Both dragons essentially come into possession of a woman, and both dragons are subsequently slayed by a hero, one whose quest it is to save the damsel whilst overcoming a sizable odd. In East Asia, however, dragons do not appear to be these catastrophic beasts, but instead something of a high-ranking animal in the Chinese animal hierarchy. While it retains ambiguous origins, the image of dragons appear on ancient Chinese pottery. There are a number of interesting stories revolving around dragons, such as the story of the man named Dongfu, from a document known as Zuo Zhuan, which detailed military affairs and politics from the Warring States period. In this story, the man Dongfu had a love for dragons, and he was able to understand and communicate with them, allowing him to tame them as his pets. At the time, he was serving the Emperor Shun, who would grant him the title Dragon Raiser, given his ability to raise dragons to do his bidding. In another story, an emperor of the Xia dynasty named Kongija was given a dragon as a reward for his obedience and worship to the god of heaven. However, he had no control over the dragon, and so was left with no choice but to hire a dragon tamer named Lu Lei, who was reputed to have trained other dragons. But one day, the dragon died unexpectedly, and so Lu Lei secretly sliced the dragon up and cooked it before serving it to the emperor. The emperor loved the meal so much that he demanded another, but with no other dragons to cook with, Lu Lei fled the palace and never returned. Another story from the East is about Lord Yi Gao, who loved dragons so much that he decorated his whole house with dragon-themed ornaments. He displayed statues, pictures, and even sported clothing of the dragon, despite having never seen one before. One day, a real dragon came to visit him, having taken notice of Yi Gao's admiration. But Yi Gao had underestimated the sheer size and scale of the dragon, and so when it came to him, he ran away in terror. Other legends in Chinese mythology and folklore see dragons carrying people to the heavens after good deeds, assisting emperors in battles against tyrants, and even fathering future emperors by copulating with their mothers. This is true in the Book of the Later Han, a collection of 24 stories that detail the Han dynasty. In one story, a woman named Shai, who lived around Mount Lao, became pregnant after touching a tree trunk that floated in the water. She gave birth to 10 sons, and would one day return with them to the tree trunk, which turned out to be a dragon. The dragon demanded to see what he declared were his sons, and when Shai presented them, 9 of them ran away in terror. One boy, however, remained staring up at the dragon, unafraid. The dragon then licked the boy's back and named him Julong, meaning sitting back, perhaps because of his choice to sit back while the others fled, and his steely composure in the face of something terrible. His brothers who had run away would later elect him as king. Descendants of this family are said to tattoo dragons on their back in honor of their ancestors' bravery. There are even legends about dragons being the creators of humankind. The Miao people, for example, in the southwest of China, tell of a story of a dragon that was disturbed by monkeys who had entered his cave. By breathing on these monkeys, they were magically enhanced and would later evolve into the very first humans. By this logic, many in China consider dragons to be gods and attribute powers to them, such as in the case of short-tailed Old Li, a black dragon said to have been born to a poor family in Shandong. When his mother saw him for the first time, she fainted, and when his father saw him, he struck him with a spade and cut off part of his tail. Old Li fled his family home and later settled at the Black Dragon River in northeast China, where he established himself as a god. Supposedly, on the anniversary of his mother's death, Old Li returns to Shandong, causing it to rain. Due to this, Old Li is considered to be a rain god. Whilst on the topic of Eastern influences of the dragon, it would be a disservice not to talk about the dragons in Japanese myth, most of which appear to be large wingless creatures with clawed feet. Many tales around dragons are linked with the samurai, most notably stories involving Minamoto no Mitsunaka, that tells of the samurai sleeping under a tree where he had a dream of a beautiful woman. The woman appeared to be distressed and begged him to save her from a giant serpent that had plagued her land. When he awoke, he was met with a magnificent horse. Without hesitation, Mitsunaka rode the horse to a temple, where he prayed for a total of 8 days, before he made his way to the land of the distressed woman, where he slayed the dragon with an arrow. In Japan, there existed an idea that dragons could be killed by metal, which would lead to samurai warriors such as Nito Yoshisada to hurling swords into the sea so as to appease the dragon gods who lived there. We also see dragons frequently appear in Buddhism, usually serving mankind as mounts. Dragons are also considered to be bringers of rain. In the Japanese village of Okumura, times of drought would see villagers making dragon effigies and parading them through the streets so as to attract rainfall. But there are a million other dragon stories out there that unfortunately won't make it into this video. So if this is something you're interested in, then please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see about making a part 2, possibly containing more myths in more detail, and maybe even discussing the different types of species of dragon which people once believed in. In the meantime, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Until the next time, guys.